Great. Welcome, everybody. Good evening. Thank you so much for being with us today. Please type in the chat where you're joining from and how many people are watching with you. And if you are able, the native land which you occupy. And if you are a host in an in-person site, feel free to chat a single check-in from where you are and how many are in the room with you. And if you wish, ask the audience members to shout out where they came in from this evening and chat it into the stream. You can chat it into the stream for them here. Great, let's hear some voices. Fill this room. I know there's folks out there. Really excited for this event with you tonight. Great, we have a nice sized crowd. Go on in the chat. If you're just joining us, please let us know where you're joining from, including the native lands which you occupy and how many people are joining with you. Excellent. Mac, Chicago Council of the Three Fires. Timothy in Florida, Seminole. Great, thank you for being here. Others, love to hear from you. Julie in Chesterton, Indiana. Thanks, Julie. Who else? Come on in, folks. Love to have you fill this room, this virtual room. Okay, let's keep those coming in. Great, Jim from Oak Park, we got a bunch. Elizabeth in Brooklyn, thanks. Richard in Berwyn, Jean in Chicago, just her. Thanks, Jean. All right, let's keep that coming in. Love to see you can all meet each other that way. But I'll keep us moving. So I'm Anna Garcia Doyle. I'm the Executive Director of One Earth Collective, which produces the One Earth Film Festival. We welcome you to this festival screening event, and we hope it will provide us all with rich opportunities for learning, a brave and safe space for important conversations, and a way to move from inspiration to action. We could not do this work without the support of our sponsors and partners. So thank you to Euclid Avenue United Methodist Church, OVP Management Consulting, Riley, Unglaub and Burke, and Merrill Lynch, a Bank of America company, Race Conscious Dialogues, Downtown Oak Park, and the Village of Oak Park. And now I'd like to give Marcella Bondi-Keenan, Sustainability Coordinator with our continuing sponsors at the Village of Oak Park, a moment to give you all a short welcome.
Good evening, everyone. It's my privilege to introduce these two films tonight, and thank you to One Earth for organizing tonight's program. It's vital to hear firsthand from the people who are fighting every day for the basic right to clean air and clean water. There's a lot of personal meaning in these films for me. My family has roots on Chicago's Southeast Side, which has been and remains one of the city's most polluted neighborhoods. Some of my family still experiences long-term health impacts from environmental exposure. So I'm grateful and inspired by the environmental justice activists and organizers who are making change and improving communities all over the world. I'm very excited to be in the room with tonight's panelists as well. Their work is revolutionary, it's incredible, and be sure to stick around for the discussion that follows. Lastly, I'd like to let everyone know that the Village of Oak Park is creating its first ever climate resiliency plan, and this is a community-driven and deeply equity-centered plan. If you live, work, study, or visit an Oak Park, we really need to hear from you to make the plan complete. So you can do that by visiting Oak Park's Climate Plan website and share your thoughts in a number of different ways. We're all impacted by climate change and by environmental pollution, and these two things do, in fact, interact with each other. And so we all have solutions and we have gifts to share in the process. So the challenges we face are very large, but we are many. And this is the essence of people power, the strength of community that creates change and health and vitality. So thank you for the opportunity to introduce. It's my pleasure to be here tonight.
We
Wonderful.
gratefully welcome you to One Earth's 11th festival season, and we invite you to join us in turning the tide on our climate crisis. The festival uses the power of film to create a sea change on topics of environment and those intersected with environment, like racial, social, and economic justice. This year, we've adapted a hybrid format where all screenings are virtual, with some accompanying in-person events taking place in the Chicago area. Whether live or virtual, we remain committed to our unique model of gathering and community to raise awareness of the issues, engage in dialogue, and be inspired to act. A powerful image and call to collective action in light of this year's festival theme, Turn the Tide, are the words of Japanese writer Ryanosuke Satoru. Individually, we are one drop. Together, we are an ocean. Our event will take place in 4 parts. Soon, we'll introduce you to some folks who will help us have a rich discussion after the film. Then, we'll watch the film together. After the film, we'll unpack its themes in a facilitated dialogue with our panelists. Please use the chat to share your thoughts, ideas, or questions. We'll end by sharing concrete actions you can take to be part of the solution. These suggested actions come from our panelists and action partners. I'd now like to make a few brief acknowledgments. The first is that as we reframe narratives around justice, environment, and equitable solutions to our climate crisis, we acknowledge the many filmmakers, film subjects, facilitators, and panelists joining this and other Fest events. Thank you. Your wisdom and experiences help us spark and sustain actions for the protection of our one Earth and for the just treatment of its resources and its people. The second acknowledgement is that One Earth Collective is based in Chicago, the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, and home to many other tribes, including today, peoples from over 100 tribal nations. Despite this, there are currently no federally recognized tribes in Illinois, due in part to colonization, relocation, and genocide. One Earth sustains its commitment to presenting films that center Indigenous stories and voices. We believe that beyond acknowledging the native lands we each occupy, we must lift up Indigenous voices and support the work of First Nations groups. If you're in the Chicago area, please support the important work being done by the American Indian Center Chicago, the Chicago American Indian Community Collaborative, Chi Nations Youth Council, and others. And watch for the Field Museum exhibition, Native Truths, Our Voices, Our Stories, co-curated with collaborators from more than 100 tribes, opening this May. A third acknowledgement is that shared agreements can help keep our conversations safe and respectful. Please observe the following agreements when participating. Put aside your preconceptions, acknowledge your privilege, internalize what you've learned, approach the conversation with respect, engage your active listening, use I statements, and get comfortable with your own story. One last thing before you meet our facilitator and program participants. If you're active on social media, tell people that this is happening. Amplify these voices and be a part of the community we're building here together. The hashtags for the festival are hashtag OEFF 2022 and hashtag Turn the Tide. And now I'd like to turn it over to our facilitator to introduce themselves, the panelists, and our film.
Thank you, Anna, and hello, everyone. I'll be your facilitator for this evening. I am Natasha Percival-Rawlins, a consultant with OVP Management Consulting Group, which is a company that was founded in Oak Park, Illinois. Now, OVP Management Consulting is a hands-on, people-focused consulting practice that thrives on the concept of helping people identify and optimize their strengths to achieve a larger organizational objective. So tonight, although all of our events are virtual, we do have a live host site. We have coordinated with the Euclid Avenue United Methodist Church in Oak Park, Illinois, to join us for an in-partner screening. And at this point, I would like to take the opportunity to give a big shout out and say thank you for coordinating this watch party.
Welcome to Euclid Avenue United Methodist Church, where our congregation is powered by solar, geothermal, and God's love. And our motto is to love God, live green, and liberate all. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. We applaud you for the commitment to joining us tonight, and we're so happy to have you. Now, to our listening audience, I am so thrilled to see that so many of you are joining us and taking interest in being edified on what is occurring in some of our communities around the country. Now, as you sit and watch these films, we really would like you to reflect on the work that was done and how it really makes you feel. Because this is not about movies. Movies are amazing, we know, but these films are about what you feel inside, the thought process that went behind them, and the cause of the people who put their efforts, their time, and their heart and their soul into making these films more aware for the greater good of our community. Now, it is indeed an honor to be here as a panelist with these amazing trailblazers who strongly and passionately represent and fight for our climate to protect our communities. And at this panel, however, would I be introducing you to some of the panelists in just a few moments. But as we do, I want you to really think about all the work that they've done and really appreciate what they have to bring forth for tonight. First, I would like to introduce to you Miss Carol White with the film subject On the Fence, A Fight for Clean Air. Miss Carol White, give a wave.
Okay, here we go. Hi, everybody. A pleasure being here.
Wonderful, thank you. And then next we have Olatunji Oboi Reed, founder of Equiticity Racial Equity Movement. Then we have Olga Bautista, Executive Director of Southeast Environmental Task Force. And now I would like to introduce the director of the first film, and she would take a minute to talk about her film. Please welcome Julie Winokur. We can't hear you. Okay, there we go.
Sorry, thank you so much. And thank you, Natasha, for those words. I really appreciate that, because what you're about to see in the Sacrifice Zone truly is a work of passion. It's a film that I started several years ago that's based in Newark, New Jersey. It's in the Ironbound of Newark, which is one of the most toxic zip codes in the United States. It's about 4 square miles and home to about 45,000 people. It is a hyper-local story that is truly a story about what's going on all over the country and all over the world, where you have designated neighborhoods that have been truly dumping grounds. They have been considered expendable. The people who live in them have been treated as though they're expendable, and thus the name, The Sacrifice Zone. The film, I'm thrilled to show it in Chicago. There's a history in Chicago of exactly this sort of thing going on. And the film is a message of empowerment, because it's about the strength of community. When community comes together and fights together, that there is hope that we can reverse an unacceptable trend. So with that, I'd love to share the film, because I would love to hold out and have discussion afterwards.
Well, I don't know about you, but I know my emotions are still very much on high. However, it is so very nice to see that their fruits of their labor were indeed rewarded. I know this is not the end of the road, and there's still a lot of work left to be done in a number of communities around our nation. So without further ado, I want to say, as a reminder to our in-person audience at the Euclid Avenue United Methodist Church, to please scan the QR code on the screen so you can contribute to the chat. Now, if you do need assistance, remember that there are volunteers at your venue who will be able to assist quietly. And don't forget to add the code Euclid at the beginning of your name so that we'll know that the comment or question came from your audience. Now, just a brief question for film. We just watched the second film, and I know you have thoughts running through you, as I do with me. So as you think about the people, as I had mentioned before, the scene, the lines that were spoken, I want you to think of what resonated with you. And just in this moment, just briefly, what stood out most for you. And I'll get to those. Then I'll get to the panelists. And then we get down into some really deep discussion on the whole 2 films that we watched and what it meant for us. So just as an icebreaker again, I'll give you my thoughts. I thought that for me, the courage it took for Rodney Ray, one of the labor retirees, to appear in front of his former colleagues and speak out for justice, I thought was such a brave stance, such courage that he showed. And it cannot be easy for him to have walked down. And when he was walking down and he was standing there, I was thinking he's in the lion's den. And my emotions just went haywire, so to speak. But I applaud him for being so brave and to speaking out, even though, they were standing right there. And I'm going to go to the chat to see if we have any contributions. Yes, we do have from Pat. The second film is summed up at the end, that building power for the people involved and that change happens from the bottom up. Indeed, Pat. Thank you so very much for that comment. Let's see if there's any more. Okay. And without further ado, I'm going to ask the panelists to bring back the panelists at this moment so I can reintroduce them fully. And first up, we have Julie Winokur. Julie is a director of the Sacrifice Zone and executive director of Talking Eyes Media, a nonprofit company that produces compelling media that advocates for positive social change. Now, Ms. Carol White is a film subject in On the Fence, A Fight for Clean Air, and is a dedicated, long-time community leader in the South Philly who has watched family members and neighbors pass away from the oil refineries pollutants spewing in her backyard. With other local residents, Ms. Carol co-founded Philly Thrive, a grassroots organization focusing on winning back the right to breathe from one of the largest oil refineries on the East Coast. Then we have Olatunji Oboi Reed, is the founding president and CEO of the Equiticity racial equity movement. Oboi works globally as a racial equity tactician and mobility justice advocate. Olga Bautista is the executive director of the Southeast Environmental Task Force and a lifelong resident of Southeast Chicago. She has a deep commitment to her community and has dedicated her professional career by helping ensure a sustainable and equitable future in Southeast Chicago. Welcome back to my panelists. Now, we will start off with a few questions first to the panelists. I'll start them off while you get your questions ready. I know you definitely have questions for them, so I'll give you time to catch up within the chat with those questions. And to all Euclid Avenue United Methodist Church audience, I'm hoping that we have some good questions coming from you as well. Now, my first question, when I thought of my first question, and I couldn't really think of just one panelist to ask this question to, because I'm very curious as to how it has impacted or what correlation have you seen in each of your respective towns or state. And the first question I'm going to ask, and I'm going to tap into each panelist for an answer, is what correlation do you see of what people are exposed to in your community regarding the pollutants and the high rates of COVID-19 pandemic impact, particularly that affecting people of color within the affected zones within your communities? Do you see a correlation between what's happening with the pollutants and the effects of the impact of COVID-19? And for this, I am going to choose first. Let's go with Olga.
Thank you, Natasha. That's a really great question. Here on the Southeast side, during the Omicron variant, when it was spreading, we were at a 27% positivity rate. in my community. So over 1 in 4 had Omicron. And we know that across the city of Chicago, it was impacting, pretty widely in the poorer communities and the communities that were communities of color. Well, one of the differences where the numbers didn't match was in how we recovered from COVID. The people who were living in these frontline communities were not recovering at the same rate as people who were impacted throughout the city of Chicago. People who were, the death rates were higher in the areas that are near industrial corridors. And at the same time, the community on the Southeast side was also fighting a permit, much like the folks in Newark and in Philadelphia were going through a bureaucratic process that needed robust community engagement. And there was no pause by our government officials, given the severity of the numbers in surviving and overcoming and, healing from COVID in our community. Actually, they would have meetings using other platforms that were not easy to use, like WebEx, where people were not able to download WebEx onto their phones. People who didn't have space to download on their phone. And then translation services. Mm-hmm. So every single person that was called from the group of people who were Spanish speakers to testify, somehow the call was dropped. So not a single person that from the Spanish speaking community was able to testify during these public hearings. Mm-hmm. When the folks from Philadelphia were talking about the community engagement process, I was overwhelmed with emotion. There was tears shed because it really triggered the community engagement process that was recommended by Michael Reagan at the EPA at the very top. They recommended to do this community engagement process, this environmental justice assessment to our Mayor Lori Lightfoot. And this time that they had to do this process was squandered. There was not community engagement. It was like one meeting where they talked at us, one meeting when they asked for feedback, but they put us in rooms with company executives and made it extremely intimidating for people to be able to share. And then the final meeting where they just talked to us again. And there was and we couldn't even tell who else was at these meetings. How many people had turned out? Was my neighbor there? I had no idea, because they used systems and a process that was extremely repressive. So my heart does go out to the folks who are on the call, to Miss Carol White and the other folks from Philly that were going through this process, because I understand how difficult that is to be going through that, especially during the time of a global pandemic.
Indeed. Thank you so very much, Olga. Thanks for sharing. And like one of the members said in the one of the film, you just feel like giving up, but there's a greater good that you have to push on. And I can hear that in you, that there's so many frustrations, there's so many roadblocks, but you keep going. Thank you so very much for that. And thank you so very much for giving me the correlation as well between COVID and what's happening within the community that's impacted. Thank you. And I want to ask Miss White, if do you see or heard of, or really have any stats that kind of speak to the correlation between the impact your community has had of the contaminants within your community and COVID-19 and the impact there as well? Ms. White?
Okay. We're fighting a battle still. We just got a coalition together for South and Southwest Philadelphia. We also have Philco. I heard that was also in Chicago once in a time. And they bought it out, but they're still operating. They're still operating. So we still continue to have fumes coming out of the oil refinery. It's supposed to be shut down and bought and everything. We're still fighting that, not alone with the COVID, because you talk about underlying ailments. So we're not even quite sure of anybody that's already sick from the chemicals, allowing that to be a part of getting a shot, 1, 2, or 3, and still survive COVID, because you're still talking about medication on top of medication on top of chemicals. So that's really hard for Philly because we're so close to the oil refinery. And I'm still saying, like the lady you've seen her multiple times, she passed away. And we talked about 3 people that passed that was very close to us, and it was outside protesting, and we missed them outside doing this because they were a part of the big part of the coalition, or the big part of Philly 5, because they were the old elders. They were our elders, So we are still fighting, not just talking about that. Also, we're still thinking about we have a bad problem with the gun violence. You know what I mean? So you've got don't if you do, don't if you don't, because you got the oil refinery they're still piping out stuff, because I still see tankers coming past my house. So they're still open. And they throw they probably do things while everybody's asleep at night, but they do their operations, and we still don't have city council coming out just to addressing stuff with us. So now we still having a fight about what Hillco's doing now, Yeah. So go ahead, sweetheart.
No, I said the fight is still going on. I can hear that passion still within you, and the frustration that you see those tankers still passing by, and it wouldn't make it easier for, like you said, health issues upon health issues within your community. Thank you so very much for that. Thank you. And I know that you're not living there in the community, but in terms of documenting, Miss Julie Winokur, did you hear anybody come up with that in correlation between the two? And before we move to the next question.
So, we do know there's a correlation, and research has come out. There was a big study that came out from Harvard University showing a direct correlation between exposure to air pollution and the incidence of COVID, the vulnerability to COVID. And ironically, it was even worse than smoking cigarettes. So we know there's a correlation, but I want to build on that, because we also know that these are communities that have large proportions of essential workers. So these were people who could not have the luxury of staying home when everybody else was quarantining. You have a lot of people who were part of the workforce that had to leave the house every day and expose themselves. So the vulnerability is compounded by the fact that you have low-income people who are in jobs that didn't afford them the luxury of staying home and working on a computer remotely. So that increased as well, and then on top of that, you have just access to healthcare, which I think is critical that Olga's talking about. So when you have people who already have less access to healthcare, and then you pile all this other, it's a recipe for disaster for folks. So in Newark, we lost a lot of people. We had very high incidences. We're in the area of the country that got hit first and worst. So a lot of people got really sick before we understood what was happening. So yes, we did see it. And Maria in the film, her mother was deathly ill in the hospital for many weeks and unable to work, which again compounds, your economic status. So, anecdotally, and then just in terms of the research that's out there, yes, this community was hit really hard. So we see that. And one other thing just is that the reality for environmental justice workers I want to like elevate the understanding that to really do this kind of work, it's not just the environment, it's also housing. Ms. Carroll's talking about gun violence. It's access to healthcare. It's access to education. It's all these things that are about environmental justice, because it is justice first and foremost, So I think that when COVID hit, there are folks like the Iron Mountain Community Corporation that are not only fighting, all this industry, but then they're the ones who are also fighting to make sure that their community is informed, gets access to immunizations, make sure they have access to health care, make sure they don't get evicted. So during COVID, one of the biggest battles that Maria and her colleagues were doing was to make sure nobody got evicted, that, we got that eviction relief throughout the pandemic. So it's just really important to understand too, that it's, environmental justice doesn't live in a narrow lane. It doesn't live just in like, our playground isn't clean or something, it really lives in this universal well-being struggle.
Thank you, Julie. And from each of you, you can tell that the impact in terms of what you've processed, what you've seen. And someone in one of the films said, I didn't really know or really think about it until somebody came knocking on my door. And that's why I was intentional of actually having each section, Chicago, Philly, and Newark, kind of bring out what correlation did you see? Because sometimes I wasn't thinking of that in terms of the correlation. So thank you for that. I appreciate that from all of you. And for Olatunji, I do have a question for you, more so of how much environmentalism do you think is taught in our schools? And if you had to make a curriculum change to our school system, what would that change be? And what impact would you hope it would have?
Great question. I do first just want to quickly respond to the first question.
Sure.
Part of what we're seeing here is compounding inequities. What happens when inequities layer on top of each other? What we find is that the adverse impact on racially marginalized people is exponentially greater. So you layer on top, environmental injustices, overcriminalizing our neighborhoods, existing health inequities, and we could go on and on and on. And it really speaks to the name of the organization that was highlighted, Philly Thrive, I believe the name of it is. We are fighting for mere survival in our neighborhoods, in our cities, while other privileged white communities have the opportunity to thrive. And we have to fight for mere inches of progress. With regards to your second question, in my experience, we are not having a conversation in schools around environmental justice and climate change. And that is a travesty, because it's our young people who are going to inherit these inequities, these injustices in our neighborhoods and our cities. In terms of a curriculum change, I would, there's a few things that come to mind. One is a focus on environmental justice. And look, when I talk about environmental justice, I'm not just talking about this whitewashed perspective on climate and how we heal our planet. I am talking about environmental justice as it is framed in that document, The Principles of Environmental Justice, when many Black and brown people came together in 1991 and framed up what environmental justice is. I'm talking about that perspective on environmental justice, one that centers root causes. One of those root causes is structural racism. Another root cause is the relentless extractive nature of capitalism. Should all we do is address the symptoms, we are on a hamster wheel of progress and setbacks, We have to address the symptoms. We also have to address the root causes, or else this is going to be a perpetual some perpetual work that we're going to be doing in our communities. So in terms of that curriculum focus, we have to focus on environmental justice with that root causes as the foundation of the work. And then the necessity to center the people who are the most impacted by these inequities and injustices. From a racialized perspective, that is Black, Brown, and Indigenous people in our society.
That was powerful. Thank you so very much. I so agree. We are lacking, and they're the ones who are going to inherit what we are leaving behind. And if we don't prepare them now, it's going to just be a catastrophe. I think when they went back into, I think it was 1984, and showed Nancy Zach at the community meetings and how she's powerful and passionate there. And then they bring forward to today where, the kids are marching. I'm like, that's such a powerful correlation between the two times in terms of there's nothing much change. So we have to start changing a system, and that system has to start probably with the youths and educating them more. And as we saw in New York, they had a tour, right, of the toxic areas. And I'm so happy that I saw a lot of youths there to take that tour, because of course, they're the ones who carry the mantle to carry on this fight for the rest of their generation and beyond. Thank you so very much. I appreciate that. Any other panelists would like to weigh in on that question?
I would love to, just for a moment. I so appreciate that, because so in the film, those young people are actually part of my class. I ended up teaching an environmental justice course at Rutgers, Newark, because I got so immersed in this issue, and because I've been doing work in Newark for many years. And when I realized what was going on in the Ironbound, it shocked me. And I'm a journalist. I'm digging for this stuff, and I was unaware. So when I started teaching the class, I had a lot of students who grew up in Newark, some of whom grew up in the Ironbound. And I literally had students say, oh my God, I am so angry, because I was diagnosed with asthma when I was 2, and I always thought I had a birth defect. I had another kid who said, when we moved into this neighborhood, our backyard was like covered in plastic. And so my grandmother pulled it up and started growing vegetables. So we've been eating vegetables from the backyard. Now, in all likelihood, that yard was covered in plastic because that is toxic soil. You cannot grow directly in the ground in the Ironbound. So like that farm you see is all raised beds because you cannot grow in that soil. That is useless. That's dead earth. And so these were young people who were living this experience, who had no idea. Even the young man in the film who keeps stopping for the airplanes, he said, I never noticed how loud those were before. Now he's growing up around this. He is always around this. And so we have to educate children better to understand that, if you need to know this is not normal or acceptable. Like we took our students out Maria came into my class and we took them out to a park about 20 minutes from Newark. Not far. They had never been there, out in the woods. And when we had them just kind of separate and just stop and listen, the kids came back together, and some of them said, well, that was really scary. That was really scary. And it was kind of like, okay, well, let's talk about that, because the environment you're growing up in, somebody built that. It was not always there. And it doesn't always have to be there. Like this is man-made, and man can make and man can unmake. So let's talk about like, what future do you want to see, and what, imagine it differently. So there's so much work to be done on the education front at a young age and ongoing, so that we can shape this better, regenerative economy and regenerative future if we don't teach kids that it doesn't always have to look the way it looks today.
Indeed. And that I've never thought of in terms of just being them in nature and them thinking it's scary because they're so accustomed to the opposite as a norm. Now that's scary in itself, truly. And as you talked, it actually brought me to my third question. And I really want to engage the audience to say, listen, we have an expert panelist here. Please, questions, and pick their brains and ask them anything that you need in terms of the experience and what they went through. We're waiting to hear from you, so don't be shy. I've seen comments come in before, so I know you're not shy, but please, if you have any questions, put that in the chat for us. But as you talked, my follow-up question, Ms. Julie, was, what would you say to people who would say, who was here first? Or why don't the residents just move? Because I know that you've heard that, and I'm going to ask a couple of the other panelists to join in on that as well. So, Julie, what would you say to that when they say, well, who was here first? Or they may say, well, why don't you just move?
I mean, it's such an absurd question. Every time I hear that, I want to tear my hair out. I would love to hear from other folks because, I mean, it's almost like it's this absurd, privileged, colonialist mindset that just says you have that option and the world is yours for the taking and you choose your destiny. And but I'd like to hear from the other folks.
Yes, actually, Miss Carol, I'm wondering if you actually heard that phrase. Why don't you just move? What did that? How did that even begin to resonate with you when you've gotten that question? If you've gotten that question,
yes, I have gotten that question, and the thing is, when you're talking about living around low-income families, we're talking about people that can't afford just to up and move. I know that I just couldn't up and move. And when I got affected after that explosion, I had to go to AC for a week just to get just to breathe a little bit better because I was affected very, very bad. That explosion and leaving all the ashes all over me. If I could have moved, that day, I would have never came back. But you have to think about the income and the economy at the time. If you're living in a low-income area, we got low-income families that's been coming, like transitioning through homelessness and people not being able to afford, own a home. You know what I mean? We got the programs is good, but to own a home and just to up and move, that wasn't the case at the time. And so you have people, like I said, low-income families that can't just up and move. I couldn't just up and move, wished I could. Yes, so that was one of the things. The second thing is when she talked about the education. I have a lot of grandchildren, and since I've been a part of Fully Thrive, I give them that opportunity to listen and come to meetings with me. When I first had my first two children, they didn't know what that stack was that was on fire. They said, "Oh, my grandmama, oh, mommy, that's beautiful out there." All the time, it was chemicals, that we were breathing until I got to knock at that door and explain what was going on right in front of my face that I didn't know of. So education for our youth and for the rest of the community is very, very important right now. So some can save money to get out of here. You know what I mean? But it's not that easy. So thank you.
Thank you. Way easier said than done. And I'm going to jump. I do see that we have something here from our audience.
Natasha, I wanted to comment.
Oh, sure. Go right ahead, please.
I think to our panelists, make sure I'm saying your name correctly, Oboi, that mentioned, like the root causes of the problems that we're talking about. And, the environmental degradation that is happening across the world. It's going to be up to people like us to be able to undo that. We have already seen like what we have now is not working. So these families, these communities who are fighting for the right to live, the right to breathe clean air, are also making the connections that this kind of behavior by industry and by capitalist interests are going to continue to harm people, are going to continue to harm the planet, are going to make it inhabitable. So I want to to lift up the fact that we're not just fighting for our neighborhood, but we're also fighting for the whole planet. Okay, so that we can be an example for other communities, so that people can see, like, it's going to be up to us to lead. We cannot count. I'm going to just be frank. You can't count on these fools to do the right thing. They have let us down over and over and over again. So we need a new economy. We need a new system, economic system on this planet that is rooted in people, not profit. I mean, we're seeing the war in Ukraine right now, and my heart is breaking. And we know that it's because of natural resources and because of the threats of those natural resources that governments want to exploit. And they're willing to bomb a whole country. They're willing to do that for these raw materials, to be able to exploit them and make lots of money off of them. So it is not, it's not just about our neighborhoods and these like smaller fights. It's about, we want all of it, right? It's not just here in my little corner of the southeast side of Chicago. I want this for my whole city, my whole state, the whole United States, this whole world. And then I was also asked just to mention that there was a huge victory that happened here in my neighborhood on the southeast side, where I had mentioned before about this chronic polluter that was located on the far north side of the city, that had received $2 billion in tax dollars, in this community had received $2 billion to redevelop this part of the city. And they had to get rid of all these eyesores and these companies that were not going to fit into the new plan of creating a new gleaming, beautiful neighborhood for the rich with beautiful river walks along the river. And they relocated 2 companies previously to my community, and this was the third. So because there was a pattern, we were able to go to the feds and say, the city of Chicago is actually perpetuating environmental racism in the city of Chicago, and you need to intervene. So HUD started an investigation because the city of Chicago receives federal funds, and to receive these funds, they have to act in ways that are equitable. And this was not that. So there was an investigation there. And then there was a 30-day hunger strike right towards the end, when we knew that this permit was going to be, like, the deadline for the permit to be issued. People in my community, 13 people were on a hunger strike. 3 people were on a hunger strike for 30 days.
Wow.
For 30 days. And some of them are not well because of the extreme direct action that they took, because we were in the middle of a pandemic, because we couldn't protest, because we couldn't go door knocking. They said, well, I could use my own body. I have self-determination, and I'm going to choose to do this thing. And it garnered so much support. There was articles in the Washington Post and the Guardian. It was all over the place. And just a couple of weeks ago, the city of Chicago, after taking the advice of Michael Reagan from the EPA to do an impact health assessment, made a decision that was based on science that showed that this community was already overburdened, that we had the highest instances of COPD, we had the highest instances of heart disease, and we were a community that was medically underserved. And they also found high amounts of lead on the premises. So for the EPA to get involved and require remediation, you need 500 parts per million. There was 58,000 parts per million in the ground. And I have to tell you that when we as activists bring up these issues and then the government officials do their own testing and then validate us and say you were right, it doesn't feel good, because to be honest, more than anything, I want to be proved wrong. I want to be proved wrong. I want to be proved that it's actually safe to live in my neighborhood. I wish that that was the case. So even in a victory like this, like stopping the relocation of a huge metal shredder, it still doesn't feel sometimes like a victory, right? Because your worst nightmare has been confirmed. And that's just, it's just terrible. It's just a terrible feeling. So I'll just wrap up there, because I know there's a lot of folks wanting to ask other questions and hear from the other panelists too. But I was just moved to share that.
No, thank you so very much. And actually, someone actually put something in the chat that you covered that as well. And I want to rest assured to the audience that at the end, there's a slide that you can actually learn more about each of these panelists and their job and what they're doing, and how to get in contact with them as well. But just to move things right along, I want to say to Olatunji Oboi, can you explore with us on the topic of community mobility rituals and their role in engaging people in your advocacy work?
Sure. And I noticed in, I believe, both films, part of the work of the community-based organizations was touring some of these sites and exploring with people the inequities that exist. So Equiticity does community mobility rituals. To date, we do community bicycle rides and neighborhood walking tours. We're going to add to that mix group scooter rolls, public transit excursions, and cyclovia style open street festivals. And we do these for a few reasons. One, we use them as a vehicle to mobilize people. So it's a way of engaging people in our work, in our organization, in our advocacy work. And then we use them to politicize people. So some of what we talked about already is helping people understand two things: the inequities which exist in our neighborhoods, and also the assets which exist in our neighborhoods. And we want to explore, we want to help them understand how are we able to leverage the assets to improve our neighborhoods, and what are the strategies we're able to put in place to mitigate the inequities that exist in our neighborhoods. So part of it is mobilizing, part of it is politicizing, and then the next part is to organize people after people have come to our organization and after they've have a better understanding of the assets and inequities. What are they willing to do about it? How are they willing to engage with us to go and execute advocacy strategies or other types of strategies to address the needs that exist in our neighborhoods? And then the final part is what we call transformation. Our work is designed for three goals: reduce violence, improve health, and create jobs in our neighborhoods. However, the way we think about community mobility rituals could be applied to many different organizations around Chicago, in the neighborhoods and cities that have been highlighted in the two films today, and throughout the country. The idea is that you use those vehicles that bring people together as an opportunity to get them to do more, to care more, and to execute strategies that help our neighborhoods improve. One of the reasons we call these rituals, they have 7 things in common. One is a rhythmic schedule. So the ritual could happen on a weekly, a monthly, or an annual basis. That rhythm to the schedule is critical because it allows people to socialize around the activity of mobility. So it gives people the opportunity to connect and engage and learn each other, you know, and there's research that shows when that happens, we will have an impact on reducing violence. Then a priority on socialization. So you want people to socialize. You want people to socialize who are engaged in the ritual, and people who maybe are just watching from the porches or the windows or the sidewalk. You want to have a two-way conversation going. And then racialized healing. We talked about environmental injustice being a racialized issue, the people who are the most adversely impacted by environmental injustice are Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. So as we get people moving, walking, biking, exploring our neighborhoods, learning about potential solutions, the impact is racialized because the people who are going to be impacted the most, should our condition improves, are Black, Brown, and Indigenous people. And then we reduce barriers to participation, so we never charge. We don't want people not being able to afford to come on our rituals to stop them from participating. When we're doing a bike ride, we have our bike share system in Chicago, bring bikes. When we're doing a walking tour, we ensure that the distance is not too onerous for people. We want to create as many opportunities for people to participate and not feel like there's a barrier to their joining the work. And then a couple more is creating shared customs. Because socialization is so important, we want to create mechanisms where people, where we begin to cement social bonds between people. And one of those is shared customs. That could be a greeting, a movement, a call and response. It could be anything that, as a group, people begin to own as a way of, as a custom that belongs to our collective. And then the active disruption of the status quo, and we saw it in the film. So some of these things are already being done. When I think in one of the films where the people at the neighborhood level stopped, they got out on the street and stopped traffic. An active disruption of the status quo is implicitly saying to ourselves that we have power, and explicitly is sending a message to those who are watching that we have power. And then the final thing is a hyperlocal collective ownership of our space. You know, the space in our neighborhoods belong to us. It doesn't belong to the city. It doesn't belong to the state. We must control what happens in our neighborhoods. We must control the planning processes that are being executed by a DOT or a Department of Housing or some other city agency. We must own what happens in that space. And those rituals allow people to begin to have a collective ownership of the space in our neighborhoods.
I like that word rituals, because you just don't want it to be a one-off, right? And that has to have some kind of stamina and some kind of meaning to it. So I like that you ended it off with, it should be rituals. Thank you so very much for that input. And I am hoping that our listening audience can have a lot of takeaway from what you just said. Now, in the essence of time, I'm going to have the panelists, as I go through, to really think about the takeaway action that you want your listening audience to really come away with. And as you think about those actions, I'm just going to read very briefly a quote from our national youth poet here in the United States, Amanda Gorman, which is a call of action in her poem, Earthrise. It says, "There is no rehearsal. The time is now, now, now. Earth, pale blue dot, we will fail you not." Now that's very powerful in itself. I'm not sure how much you have actually heard that, but if you think about it, the call of action, we will not fail you now. And as we go through, I want each of the panelists to kind of just give your listening audience a takeaway, an action takeaway of that you will want them to adhere to as they have seen the film and as they move on to tomorrow and the next day. What can they do? And we'll start off with Ms. Carol White. What call to action do you want your listening audience to walk away with?
You called me first. I was just thinking about what I was going to say. The first thing I would love to say is that in order to live, we must breathe. In order to survive, we must come together. And in order for us to be an action part of survival, would be we can say a people power. You know, people power is very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. We must come together. Thank you so very much. Olga?
It would make me very happy if folks who are watching, folks who are seeing this later on in a recording, to please follow Shy Hunger Strike at Shy Hunger Strike on Twitter and on Instagram. Even though the city has made their announcement to deny the permit, we know that the company, because they tell us every day that they already invested $80 million and that they're going to fight this, that we need to be like just really ready for like whatever they decide to do. And then it is like TBD. There's a lot of things that we want to see, like the how part, like how the city is going to, prevent this from happening again, like what kind of policies are needed in our communities. So please visit Shy Hunger Strike. And then our website is the SETaskforce.org. And we'll be updating with more direct actions and other ways for people to support. There's also ways to donate to the campaigns on the Southeast side. And then also please reach out to us through our website at SETaskforce.org, or even on the social media at Shy Hunger Strikes, and ask us to be part of your events. We'd love to come and talk to your organization. We'd like to share, what happened in this 3.5-year campaign during a global pandemic, how we got around, the limitations regarding community engagement during the pandemic. We like to talk about that, lessons that we learned, and ways that we can prepare for future community engagement, direct actions, and things like that. So I want to just let folks know that I am part of this community of freedom fighters, and I want to be at your service and learn from you and share some of the things that we did in our campaign.
Indeed. Thank you. That was definitely also our call for action. Just thank you for that. And Ms. Julie?
So I would say first and foremost is to commit your time, your resources to organizers on the ground who are fighting the fight already. Olga's organization for sure, the Ironbound Community Corporation, if you're interested in what's happening in Newark, there are people doing this work already on the ground, and you need to identify them if you haven't already and put your time and money and any resource available, but also to offer with that sort of open heart, open mind, where you just say, what do you need? Because I'm here. Too many people go in well-intentioned, expecting to sort of tell the organizers what they're going to do for them. So I would say just to go in a true sense of being a dedicated follower, as opposed to, trying to take too much agency yourself. Also, the Sacrifice Zone film is available. Anybody who wants to, bring it to their community, bring it into their schools. We are doing so many screenings everywhere to get this word out and to have people thinking about discussing what is reflected in their own communities, where their garbage is going, how they contribute to these issues, and how they can become involved. So our website is thesacrificezone.org. And there's a lot there in terms of, resources and how you find, myself and my team. And we've also produced a short companion to the Sacrifice Zone that features organizers in New Jersey who were able to get the most progressive piece of legislation passed in the country that forces the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection to say no to permits that will go in for facilities going into overburdened communities. And so this is really moving things in the right direction. So we would urge activists who are interested in trying to get legislation passed to, see the resources that we have and to be in touch with the Ironbound Community Corporation about what it took to get that legislation passed, because it really is groundbreaking. And it really does come down to that. It will need to be regulated better. You can't just have permits, as one of our people says in the film, Melissa Miles, it's a permit to pollute. Well, that has to stop. It's not a permit to pollute. And so legislation is key.
Indeed. Thank you so very much for that takeaway.
Can I just mention that the Ironbound Community Corp has been advising us in the city of Chicago regarding a cumulative impact policy for the city of Chicago that we are working with the mayor's office, Chief Sustainability Officer Angela Tovar, who's from this neighborhood, from the Southeast Side, and is in the mayor's office. And the mayor actually committed to putting forward a cumulative impact ordinance. So we've been talking a lot to the folks, not myself, but people from our team, to the folks at Ironbound to hear about like what are the limitations and how we can make sure that this piece of legislation is strong enough to protect people, frontline communities. And I just have to give a big shout out to Anna Bautista from the Ironbound Corporate Community Corp, who has been guiding us in our process and has actually done some research about these kind of policies across the country, like a policy scan that's really wonderful at the new school in New York. So yes, the connections are being made, and I just wanted to give a quick shout out to them. And I believe that Ms. White also put on the chat in our internal chat about her website.
Yes, I saw that. That was phenomenal. Thank you for sharing that and that collaboration. And that is powerful within itself that that's happening. And I want to definitely encourage others that the buck hasn't stopped with your community. Reach out and share what you know and what you've gone through. And Ms. White did put here that you can also know about her organization more by going to phillythrive.org. Thank you so very much for that. And then last but not least, Olatunji, your call to action for your listening audience.
Sure. I'll be brief here. One is to study the principles of environmental justice. It is critical that people have a historical framing of what environmental justice is from the perspective of people who are the most impacted by environmental injustices. You could Google it. It's available. You can find it online. That document, I think, is a critical foundational understanding for anyone interested in this work. And then I would also recommend that people study Equiticity's Racial Equity Statement of Principle, which, similar to the principles of environmental justice, really frames up what racial equity is. We have to move away from these whitewashed, empty, non-impactful perspectives on environmental justice and racial equity. So those two documents will be helpful. And the final one, I just want to underscore something that was already talked about, and that is legislation. We must not leave a commitment to environmental justice to people with good hearts. Good hearts and warm bodies come and go. Shifting political winds come and go. Goofy smiles and awkward handshakes come and go. We must legislate a commitment to environmental justice, or else, again, as I mentioned, we are on this perpetual hamster wheel of incremental progress and setbacks. We must address root causes. The legislation must be persistent and pervasive. And the reason we have to take that approach is because capitalism is persistent and pervasive. Structural racism is persistent and pervasive. So we must not think about environmental justice in this sort of silo that, gets applied to, things as they're needed. We must think about it as a complete, exhaustive framework that is reflective in cities and states and even the federal government. Federal legislation hyperlocal city and state legislation is critical to us having the impact we seek in our neighborhoods.
Now, listening audience, we've heard from all the panelists. You have a plan of action in everything everyone just said in terms of all the panelists that just gave that advice. All very powerful, all very doable, also very bite-sized pieces that you can take away. So thank you so very much for that. And I'm just going to pull out 2 calls to action from our slide. Take action real quickly in a sense of time. One of them is so simple, and every time I see it, I just have to smile. It says, "Be with nature, go outside." With our community, with our environment full of electronics, we always most often inside. Go outside. We heard one of the panelists say that they did take the students outside, and they were like, "That was kind of scary." I think we all need to go outside more and enjoy. And one other call of action that's very important is that you will please join our One Earth virtual book discussion group. Please join our One Earth virtual book discussion group for All We Can Save, beginning the week of March 14th. You can sign up at oneearthfilmfestival.org. That's oneearthfilmfestival.org. Okay. All right, sorry about that. Okay. And so just wanted to also let you know that in the upcoming days, all the listening audience here will receive an email with the takeaway action points, as well as a link to the recording, the discussion and the transcript of the chat, and the ideas and the resources that were shared here. So again, the panelists, their information, the link to reach out to the organization would also be within that realm as well. And as we close, I hope that you felt call towards this One Earth films that we showed. I hope that the tables are turning, and actually the tide is turning within you, and to make that difference, to continue making that difference, and to really put that foot forward in helping. And as one panelist say, we need more than that warm body and warm smile. Another panelist said, we need that money, that time, that resource. Please really think about how you can contribute. Think about what's in your backyard. Think about when it moves from your house into the trucks, where does it go? Who is impacted? And we'll let it really sit and resonate with you, what's happening as well. Before I close though, I do want to have these 2 quick inserts one is from Miss Carol Hemingway. I hope I pronounced her last name correctly. A 70-year-old Philly Thrive member and circle coordinator. One of the things that she said that really impacted me that I want to leave with you is change happens from the bottom up. And I remember someone said it in the chat as well, when our listening audience, change happens from the bottom up. If you are going to make things happen, you have to mobilize people. We all have the right to breathe. And by Maria Lopez, to not keep going is to leave my community behind. And when she said that, I thought to myself, that was such a selfless comment. And it exemplifies not only Miss Maria Lopez, but others like her to just keep going. So once again, I want to thank my panelists. I want to thank everyone involved with all of these films. It has been such a memorable night, and I'm sure our listening audience have a lot to take away and a lot to think about. I really want to encourage everyone to tweet, post, and share about what you've experienced online and in social media, please, and get the word out. We do have a whole week left of activities and films, And we'll really appreciate you helping us getting the word out more to our to more people. So we'll have more not only for the week, but also for next year. And last but no means least, a huge thank you to each and every one of you again here participating, and our live audience in Illinois. Thank you so much for coming together. Let's all give ourselves and our program, our participants, a last round of applause. Thank you so very much, and have a good evening, everyone, and we'll see you soon.